Well, Thaao, it is so lovely to see you again. It really is.
It really is.
So it was 1981 that you started on General Hospital, and that role was Victor Cassadine.
Yes.
Thaao, am I right in thinking you are the first Australian actor to hit it big in the world of American daytime drama series?
Well, when you think this is my 40th anniversary, and when I started, I mean, I didn't even know some of them where Australia was, really. Yes, I'm one of the, I suppose, one of the most successful. I mean, I've had a lot of actors come up to me, even in Australia, who said that they were inspired. Even Anthony LaPaglia, who was from Adelaide, said that when he saw me in Los Angeles, he said, I can do that. I did have an accent that was, nice day to day, which they didn't quite think I could find a role.
I'm sure they didn't.
When I started with General Hospital at the time of Elizabeth Taylor, there was nobody else who came on that show that had a British accent, which they considered mine to be a British accent. And then when Dynasty started, then they started to bring like Collins and a few of the others with British accents. So it started that, because I remember in soaps, they always said, this is an American country. This is a story of American life. And you're coming on to here and your accent is not good. Doesn't work for us, And that's what I heard. And then because the actor who had beat me in the role didn't work out, I was called back and she said, let me give you a try. Let me see what happens. And that's how it all started.
Of course, you were born in Sydney. I read in one of your books that when you were 7, you were actually shot in your eye. Tell me that story.
We were in Surrey Hills on a playground. We were chasing each other, and there was a Chinese guy who was shooting at birds with a pellet gun. I don't know how he hit me, but the next thing I know is it struck me in my left eye and it blinded that eye. I had to strengthen it through going to the hospital for 6 months, but they thought at one point I was going to lose it. But emotionally, it was a shocking thing, because listen, here I am at this stage of my life and it's still affecting me.
You originally had designs on maybe becoming an archaeologist, and then you joined the diplomatic corps. Then in the 60s, you wound up in New York City.
Here I was just turning 21 and I'm in New York City. I mean, what an enormous city. The fashion, the buildings, the theatre, all those things that I had never experienced before.
Yes.
And then I worked at the UN for the Australian mission for a year. I finally got some money. Suddenly I went into a fashion place and the guy took a look at me and he said to me, would you like a job here? And that was Meledandre. And so I had a number of different jobs along the way, but they're all part of the seeds that I had planted that I'm still using today.
And it's quite true, isn't it, that a psychic actually years before mapped out this entire journey.
Diction predicted that in my 30s, I would start developing a character that would be famous for its diabolical qualities. And I went, I don't want to be an actor, really. That's not my. He says, no, you're going to be an actor. Anyway, with all those things that took place, it was in the art world where somebody came in and it was Claudette Colbert and Jack Lemmon's manager was there. And he said, you should be in movies. And I said, I just laughed. And I remember him calling me and says, listen, would you like to be an extra? And I did extra work in 2 major films. And then I suddenly got, wow, this is kind of interesting work. And that's how it all started in a way.
Now, before you became an actor, you touched on the fact that you're working in a high-end fashion boutique, Roland Meledandre, and you had quite the encounter with Robert Redford.
He would come in, and if my boss wasn't there, he'd say, is Roland here? And I'd say, no, and then he'd say, thank you, and go. And I told my boss, he says, your job is to keep him inside. And I said, okay. So I thought, well, when next time he comes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a suit that will look great for him. And I remember when he came in, I said, oh, Roland told me he's got something I must show you. He goes, what? So I distracted him from his exit.
Yeah.
And he goes, right. I said, you know what, come in. I said, I'll lock the door. I won't let anybody in so you can have some privacy. So that's when I took him and I said, look at this suit. It's so beautiful. It was brown. And he said, oh, that's very nice. So I said, let me try the jacket on you. So I tried the jacket on, and I was, excited the fact it's Robert Redford. And so Roland used to have cut high armpits so that the average person could look like they had a great body. And he knew where to put the button right on the belly button, because that would give you the illusion from the side that you were straight, you didn't have a stomach. He knew all these details. And so I lifted the arm and I said, oh, this fits you nicely. And then as I was coming down, I was surprised that there were a couple of handles that I wasn't expecting. And I grabbed them. I couldn't believe I did that. I grabbed them and I said to him, if you want to wear this suit, you'll have to lose this. And his mouth just dropped open in the mirror, and so did mine simultaneously. And then we just broke out laughing. And I went, oh, thank God, because he could have stormed out and I would have had to tell my boss. I told Robert Redford that he was a little overweight in the hips. And so, which he, not really, but he wore clothes so beautifully. And but that was my experience with him. And then 10 years later, I'm in a restaurant and he's with Paul Newman. And when he gets up, and wouldn't you know, Robert Redford came to my table. He'd seen me and said, how are you, Thaao? And he shook my hand 10 years later. So obviously he never forgot the handle. So I think it was the Australian side of me, how outspoken we are. We can't help but say the truth, so we brought up. You can't pretend with people in Australia. They'll just call it.
You touched on Miss Colbert before, and the fact that for a brief while you were working in an art gallery, and in she swept, and it would seem, Thaao, she had eyes for you, didn't she?
She was such a sweet lady. And when she came in, and here I was, 21, an apprentice, earning $75 a week. I mean, can you imagine, in New York? And she said, oh, to my boss, oh, come on, Bob, why don't you ask him for lunch? He's so pretty. And he goes, no. And I said, oh, I'd love to. He goes, no, stay in the store. And when they left, and I was so upset. And then I suddenly realized she left a shoebox. So I closed the store, I ran down to the restaurant, and my boss looked up at me and he says, what are you doing here? And she said, oh, Bob, have him join us. Have him join us,
Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis is another fabulous brush with somebody wonderful that you had, again, when you were working for a brief while in that art gallery. I love this story.
There was a knock on the door, and when I opened that door, I thought, who could that be? There she was, standing there in a pill-top hat and all pale blue. I'll never forget the outfit. And she goes, good afternoon. She said, I don't have an appointment, but may I join and may I see the gallery? I've heard such lovely things about it. And I remember taking her down in the back, and I picked up the phone and I said, would you like some tea? She said, I would love some tea. And I was surprised that she accepted, and because I was so young. And I called the Masahiro. I'll never forget his name. He was the houseman. I said, Masahiro, it's a very important person here, Jacqueline Kennedy. I said, would you bring us some tea? He said, oh, please, you're an apprentice. He said, you don't tell me to make tea. And I went, okay. So he came down the elevator with his shorts on. And when the elevator door opened, there she was. He blushed. He got straight back upstairs, put on his uniform, came down with the best silverware, with the cookies and everything. And I sat there for an hour with Jacqueline Kennedy, and she asked me a lot about my Greek heritage. And we had this wonderful conversation. And so when my boss came back after the lunch with Claudette, who was no longer with him, and said, anybody important come in? And I said, yes, Jacqueline Kennedy. And of course, he says, yes, sure. Went upstairs and went into his office and closed the door. I said, okay. But it was not until 3 weeks later that she called. And he started to say to her, oh, yes, this is my gallery. And she said, no, I want to speak to Thaao. No, I want to speak to Thaao. My boss couldn't get over there. He couldn't make the connection.
You mentioned that it was Jack Lemmon's manager who suggested that maybe you should go into doing some extra work, acting, whatever. Do you remember your first Hollywood movie or TV role?
My first role was an extra in a film called Cactus Flower with Ingrid Bergman. And I remember Alan DeWitt, his name was the manager, said to me, you can come and work for about 8 hours. You'll make, it was, I think it wasn't very much, I think it was $100. I said, sure. But he said, it's a night shoot. So I had to go from the art world into the night shoot, not getting any sleep. She saw me. They had said, oh, we want someone to dance with her, you. And so she saw me and she says, you, You want to come over and dance? And that's how I met Ingrid Bergman. I danced with her. You know, she was a tall woman, didn't have much to say because, you know, it was a short sequence. But I remember she was classy. I mean, a lady. And all I remember was she greeted me with respect. She didn't greet me like an extra. She was happy to greet me, and then we went into the dance. And then I think it was one of the leading men came over to her and asked her to dance, and that was the moment. But you know, the one thing about that breed of actors, they were so professional, so endearing to you, so respectful. The humility, it wasn't, you never got that like you do today with some actors. I mean, I get worse attitudes from actresses in daytime than I did from those great stars. They come to a point in their life where success is not just about the success, it's about who you are. And there's nothing worse than upsetting a fan, because that fan can never watch you again. You have to know that business.
Talking about great stars, Dame Elizabeth Taylor. Now, your first big role on daytime was General Hospital. In comes Elizabeth Taylor for a story arc that saw her there for a couple of episodes, and she was playing your sister-in-law.
She didn't come in playing star like some did. She came in as a person. And then she realized she'd never been in this medium before. And so she just started to rehearse her lines and then cracked herself up, not remembering them. Yeah. And then she swore like a trooper. She had everybody at ease, you know. This is Elizabeth Taylor, and she looked, the purple hat, those purple eyes. I mean, she was just so extraordinary and a beautiful mannered, and she just loved everybody. And then, of course, later on, when they celebrated an evening with General Hospital and she was invited, and when she came in, everybody went crazy. My friends had dared me to go and introduce myself again, and I did, and I was in a tuxedo, and I remember kneeling down to her, and I introduced myself and spoke to her for about 15 minutes, and I was just in awe. And then I thought, oh my God, Elizabeth Taylor. And then suddenly I go back, and when they asked me, she said, what did she say? What did she say? What did she say? I said, I have no idea. I said, I couldn't remember anything. All I could remember was this was Elizabeth Taylor. She was, I don't know. It's just, you know, you meet those people who are bigger than life, you know, who've had great history, who've been in every magazine you've ever turned a page on. And here they are, and they're just wonderful human beings.
What is so fascinating about her role is she was such a huge fan of the show, as I understand it. She called up the producer and said, I want to be on. Is that kind of how it played out?
She called Gloria Monty. That was who was the executive producer. She was as tough as nails. She was about 5'2". She was like a Joan Crawford. If you think of Joan Crawford, this was our producer. I mean, she would cut your balls off if you upset her. But I remember she came to us and just like it was normal and announced that Elizabeth Taylor was going to be coming on the show and that everybody was to behave. And that's how it happened. Everybody was just so generous to her in their respect of her, the love for her, and the admiration of her, because, you know, there's been no greatest female star, really, I don't think, when you think of what she accomplished.
In the very early 80s also, you land the role of Count Anthony DiMera on Days of Our Lives. He was deliciously diabolical, and you became, and remain so, one of the show's biggest stars. How did that opportunity come along?
See, out of the 30 actors on General Hospital that were invited for that summer storyline of Luke and Laura and Elizabeth Taylor, there were 30 of us. I was called in, and I was the only one who survived. And they said to me, we'd like to bring you back. So could you wait a couple of months? And we'd like to bring just the one character. The other two brothers were dead. So I said, oh, okay. So I called my agent, but I get a call. It's from Pat Falcon Smith. She was the head writer for that story. She said, I'd love you to come with me to Days of Our Lives. And I went, oh, but what about General Hospital? She said, I'll really create a great character. So here I was in one of the most iconic stories with all these wonderful actors. And then suddenly I'm being told to come. And I said, I don't know if that's ethical. And then I remember I went in, I had to test. And when I tested, Gloria Loring says, I want him. So I became Count Anthony DiMera. And it was nice to be in those days that somebody else wanted you and they fought for you. So that's how it all started. And there I was playing a diabolical character, just like Dick Should predicted.
The joy of acting, for those who played those fabulous villains, is in playing those diabolical characters. Did you really love, and are you still with Days of Our Lives, do you still love playing Tony DiMera?
It varies with different writers and how they get you. Some people are a lot more worldly than others because they're playing international characters. They're not Americans. The hardest thing to do is to remember that much dialogue. It was an excruciating time in the beginnings because I couldn't remember that many lines, but I thought to myself, what is it about me as a human that I can add to this character? Because it's a serial. It's not something that you go into, method acting, and it's you, and you elevate those areas of yourself that in many ways would vibrate with an audience. I had created this character that has lasted over 40 years. I've played two characters there.
The evil twin.
The evil twin. So that was always good. Why did I enjoy the evil twin? Because it upset people. Sometimes, especially actors who were so, cocky and very cowboyish, So I would always save my precious moments for the take. So
but there is something, Thaao, surely absolutely delicious about playing diabolical villains, playing those evil characters like you've got Tony, and then you've got the evil twin, Andre. I mean, just how wonderful is that? I guess it's because they're characters with so much meat on their bones, really.
Yeah, but it's the meat that you have on your bones. It's not, you're supposed to go beyond the words, beyond. See, someone told me a long time ago in the business is, listen, they're going to give you a script. You've got to go beyond the script. You've got to add things that the writers didn't think about. You've got to give pauses. You've got to give definitions of things through that dialogue that they didn't expect. You can give things with almost with a kind of suspicious humor. You can give things that are dark and then come back with a smile, and nobody knows if were you being honest about something or do you have something up your sleeve. So the thing I always just say to actors is always walk into the scene with a secret. Have a secret. It could be what you're going to be going to the store to buy, but nobody knows about. But that's a secret. I've
done the maths, and I think I'm right with this. You've died so far 7 times on Days of Our Lives. Do you recall of those 7 deaths, maybe the most dramatic or the most jaw-dropping?
I think the worst one was when I fell off the steps and I fell onto a spike and went straight through my heart. And I collapsed there. It was as if I was a Christ who had fallen on like a vampire. And then suddenly when it dawned on me what this writer was thinking about, or when I came back to life later after they fired him, and then while I was going into the next phase of my character, he was hired back, and I thought, oh, there's my demise again. And it was true. He couldn't get, and this time he got a tiger to attack me. So they brought in a real tiger, and then they had to get a tiger's head with a stick on it to make it look, and then I had to play it off camera with all the blood all over me. And then at one point, it was a circus, and they were going to pour 40 pounds of blood, of red dye, over my head. And it was a symbolic thing of what was going to happen to me. And when I was wearing the hat and in the circus saying hello to everybody, the producer said, stop. They realized that if that blood had hit my hat at 40 pounds from that air, would have cut my ears off.
Yeah.
So they instructed me, I took my hat off and then the blood came. And then of course, I went flying on my ass. It was, so you look at all these things that these writers have done to you over the years, but you're still there. They're not, but you're still there.
So you fall down onto this spike. How did they bring you back to life from there?
After a while, because I was playing two characters, they were saying, "Oh no, it was Andre that died. It wasn't Andre. It was impersonating him," and it was things like that. There were so many ways. I created the first one when I said to them, "I'm leaving after 5 years," and they were really upset. And so when then about, I don't know, 4 years later, they called me back. There's, "Can't you come back? We'd love to have you back." So I go back. Now this writer's going to kill me after 3 years. And nobody smoked in the show. I said to my producer, "I'd like to smoke in this because I was setting up a murder and making it look like someone committed suicide." And I remember I took a cigarette. And my producer called me up and says, "You know why I can bring you back this time?" I said, "No, why?" He says, "Because nobody smoked on the show and you were the only one. And we can say that it wasn't you. It was another character." So that's how we got through. It was all, a spare of the moment. But, you bring in ideas and hopefully your interpretation works. And, your crew is your barometer, I think.
Yes. In between the various deaths on Days of Our Lives, you found the time to come to Australia. I think the date line was 1988. And this was for the reboot of TV's Mission Impossible.
I remember auditioning at Paramount here. And my agent, I remember calling my agent and I said, "Oh, listen, there's a real interesting part from Mission Impossible." "Yeah, it's already cast." And I said, "I heard it's not." "No, it's cast." I said, "No, it's not." So they checked and they said, "Okay, we'll see him." So I went in and I did a big audition. I thought it went well. Then the next thing I knew is it was going to be between me and Angela Paglia. So Angela Paglia said, "When I saw you on television, I knew I could do that. And here we are. And I am now going to be rivaling for the role." And I said, "Oh." So that really upset me because the way he said it, that it gave me the ammunition to go in, because the scene was of a man who had 20 minutes to live and he was screaming from prison. Mm-hmm. Well, when I did that, and then I did another scene, the word came back that I was too attractive for the part. And they said, "Oh, that's ridiculous." So they had me come in again. And so this time I put powder in my hair. I didn't shave. I had this old suit. I went in, did the scene, and I got it. But to be able to go home from America to Australia in a series that was iconic, and to play that kind of a role, which was kind of a diabolical. And I remember sitting around with the producers and they said to me, "What should we call you?" I said, "I like the name Nicholas." And then they looked at me and my hair and everything. They said, "Black, Nicholas Black, that's how you're going to play." And that's how it started.
And of course, you got to work with the great Peter Graves, who was in the original, of course, as Jim Phelps.
The opening of that show was difficult because it was, we would have to reveal what we were going after. So it was really, it didn't have any emotion in it. It was just information being passed to the audience about where the team was going in this episode. And I remember I was doing my lines and he wasn't even looking, and then he responded and I said, "Excuse me," I said, "Do you mind listening?" And he went, "What?" I think everybody gasped. I said, "Do you mind listening?" And he just looked at me. I said, "Okay, thank you." And then I did it. And from that moment on, he and I were like that. It wasn't that I did him a favor, but in a way, I made him look at the fact that he was en route, that he had done this part before for many years and was very successful at it. He knew how to do the eye, those blue eyes, and he knew how to twinkle. So, because I remember an Australian director saying to him, "Give me that twinkle, Peter, give me that twinkle." I said, "Oh." So certain movements, things were the same, and he would look a certain way. And so when I said to him, "Would you listen?" And he just, because there's nothing worse than talking to an actor who's not listening to you and his mind on something else, or he's waiting for his cue. There's something, because they're not offering you anything, they're not passing the ball. So I've met a few of those, and so you've got to straighten out before you move any further.
Now, you in 1991 got to star in what was described, and indeed it was, a blockbuster miniseries, Memories of Midnight, of course, based on the Sidney Sheldon book, with Jane Seymour and notably Omar Sharif, who you formed a really close bond with on that set, didn't you?
When he came on set, let's face it, after doing the movies he did, and he comes on set to do a miniseries, we were shooting it in the house, the president of Yugoslavia at the time, and they had a big stairwell, and so it was a very complicated scene. But I remember sitting in makeup, and I said, "Oh, hello," and he goes, because I was very enthused, and he goes, "Oh, hello," and put his makeup on. And then we had a scene where he would come in, and they would give him coming out of the shadows, and he would come in and just say something to me. And when we rehearsed, he said, "That is an 18th century table. When I hit you and you go flying over that table, please don't break it." And I went, "What?" I said, "No." I said, I'm not going to break because I'm not going anywhere." He says, "What?" I said, "No." I said, if you hit me and I go flying over the table and we have a 4-hour miniseries, you and I have nowhere else to go if that's my first scene with you. And he goes, "I love this actor." So from that moment, he came over, hugged me, and then he found a friend, like we all do, try to do, who am I going to associate with on the set? And he said to me, "Do you like caviar? Do you like champagne?" And that's what we did for lunch every day, was have caviar and champagne, and he would tell me stories. I would ask him stories about Lawrence. He liked me a lot, he said, because I reminded him of his son.
Now, did he tell you a story about what it was like working on that wonderful David Lean epic, Lawrence of Arabia?
When he and Lawrence, Peter O'Toole, were on their camels, they used to drink a lot. And this particular day, they'd had too much to drink. And he said that when they got on the camel, they were tilting over. So what happened was they tied them up on the camels so they could stand straight. So every time I've seen that movie and see Aqaba, that's what you see is that scene where they're attacking. And I think, oh my God, they're drunk in the scene. And then the camel kept going. And I think one of them, I think it was Omar, tilted over, or was it Peter? I can't remember. Tilted over and fell upside down in the water with the camel, and his head was in the ocean. So he was drowning. And so they had to go. So that was his, that's how he used to pass his time.
Now, Thaao, I remember you telling me in a previous conversation that Omar Sharif became very emotional on set and really panicked that he couldn't remember his lines. And I think you said that maybe this was the sign that there were underlying health issues. Just step me through how that played out.
Well, I think now that I look back on it, it was because he had the beginnings of dementia.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we had this long sequence at an auction house, and we had a lot of dialogue. I think it was like 4 pages, and that was a lot for a script. And so we were walking down, he was confronting me, and he couldn't remember the lines. And so the director said to me, "Would you take him behind the curtain and talk with him, because you two have a good relationship?" And so I did. And as I was saying, listen, I was trying to warm him up and saying, "Listen, we all go through this, this." And before I knew it, he was sobbing on my shoulders, saying he was so embarrassed. And I'm sure that didn't happen too often with him because he was such a pro. But that was the time. And then I found out later on that he had beginnings of Alzheimer's, and that's how he passed on.
You really kind of cornered the market for playing baddies because you do it so well. But Celeste Patterson Saves the World is now an absolute cult classic. And in the mix of that fabulous cast is you, Barry Humphries. Was Dame Edna swooning all over you?
When we first meet, I'm sitting in my throne because I'm playing the great colonel. She comes into the room with all that hair, and suddenly she spots me, and she stops, and in slow motion, she comes towards me. And while she's doing that, she puts out her hand. And I remember, when Greeks in my day, the dowries and everything, the jewelry would come up. What is in the dowry, the house, the whatever. But with her, Dame Edna wears lots of jewelry. And so when I went to kiss her hand, all I did was I looked at her jewelry first. And I was eyeing her jewelry, and then I would look up at her like an Arab, and looking at her like, oh, this is a good catch. And she couldn't stop. I had Barry Humphries laughing his head off. He couldn't stop laughing. Every time we did a take, he couldn't, because I would look up at him and he knew exactly what I was doing. So that was he was a great sport. And then I said, how are we going to show that you and I were having this affair, or that we were loves, So what he did was, I said, why don't you kiss me on the cheek and leave a big lipstick mark? And so that when we come out of the tent, everybody will know that we've been necking. What was great about Barry Humphries is that he makes you creative, because he's so smart and so quick, that you've got to be on your toes with him.
You took, and this is intriguing, a 4-day metaphysical course with Shirley MacLaine. Tell me about that adventure.
I had read for her 5-hour miniseries on her journey to Machu Picchu, where she came across the gods or the spirits, and she liked what I brought into it, and she was really very, very friendly, very nice, very smart but tough. And I remember when we were going to start to work together, she just raised her skirt up to her knees with her boots there and said, let's start. And she was that direct, and you had to be ready. Later on, she said, listen, I'm going to do a course, because we were talking about metaphysics. She said, I'm going to do this course. You want to be a guest, come in? And I said, I'd love to. So it was 4 days in Los Angeles of having her talk to about 800 people in the audience. No chairs or anything, we were sitting. And we went through this whole metaphysical thing. And it was fantastic. It was none of that. Sometimes she goes into mumbo jumbo stuff. She was really insightful.
Now, Thaao, another string on your very busy bow is that of author. And you've written a couple of books. I'm holding one here, Seducing Celebrities, One Meal at a Time, cover-to-cover stars and the fabulous dishes that you could have, maybe did, or would have cooked for them. Doris Roberts was a very close friend of yours. How did you two come to be such close chums?
We were studying in the same workshop. She'd come to a Saturday class that Milton Katselas director. I was his assistant for many, many years. So one day I just said to her, do you want to come over for dinner? She said, I'd love to. I mean, we lived 5 minutes away from each other. We both lived in the Hollywood Hills. So she would come over at least once every 2 weeks. So I cooked many meals for her. And I tell you, she was nobody's fool. If she didn't like you, she had zingers like you wouldn't believe. She was like B. Arthur. But if she loved you, I mean, when I took her out for dinner, she would hold my hand. I mean, it was interesting. The trust I felt with her.
I think about some of the great people you've worked with who are no longer with us, like William Hurt, Altered States. You had such a dynamic in that movie. And also it was notable, I think, because it was Drew Barrymore's first movie role.
Right. And also it was Ken Russell after he did Women in Love, which I loved that movie. But he turned out to be quite the monster. And
really?
He came at me with a wine bottle. I was the only one he hadn't attacked. Basically, he attacked everybody because he was a bit of a drinker. And it would swing his moods. And I remember that one time with that Patty Chayefsky, who wrote the screenplay, had said, and in the contract, that we weren't to change any of the dialogue. And so Ken Russell thought and seen that we were doing was too long. So I said, let's cut it. And I said, no, but I was told we're not supposed to cut any of the dialogue. And he goes, I'm the effing director, and so we'll do it. I couldn't get it together. It went from a page to a quarter of a page, and I couldn't get my through line in the scene. And he came at me with a wine bottle. I was the last of them. And I thought, it's the only time I've ever been in this industry where I was going to punch somebody out. That's how bad it got. And then it all turned out well. We did 5 perfect takes after all the other takes. And then I went to my place to change, and I sat down and I sobbed. I have never had an experience like that. He called me the worst things you could think of. Anyway, and then we finished, and that was it. And he came that night with again a bottle of Dom Perignon and applauded for the fine work. And I went, wow. So we went from one extreme to the other, and so he was not He was not an endearing person, let me put it that way. He was quite neurotic.
Now, Thaao, you've got a very interesting project on the brew. I'm sure you can't talk too much about it, but it's a movie and it's based on Troy. Tell me what you can.
There was an archaeologist by the name of Schliemann who discovered Troy and Mycenae, and he was the father of archaeology. I went to Greece and I went through 60,000 documents, his diaries and everything. And out of that has come a story, not just the script itself, which I'm really loving, but it's I've written a trilogy for my podcast. And it's taken a while to complete because of work and when I can get to it. But I've recorded all 3 segments. The first part of Schliemann and the treasure he found. Mm-hmm. The second is with the treasure he found in Mycenae, which is all about the Trojan War and the golden masks that he found. And the third is about Ulysses. And they're doing a movie on it, but the Ulysses story. And I met with archaeologists last year. I went to Greece, and they're finding extraordinary things now that the world doesn't know about, that I can't reveal right now. But it's about bringing Ulysses home after 3,000 years. And that the island of Ithaca, that is called Ithaca today, is not the island of Ithaca of ancient times. So that's the story that I'm writing. And the podcast, I finished the recording. They put the music and the sound effects. Now I'm waiting for the finalization. And that should be done in the next few weeks.
Talking about those who've left you and that were very dear to you, do you sometimes feel them around you, Thaao? I mean, might you be sitting there and suddenly you think, I feel Doris is there or somebody. Does that ever happen to you?
I don't know if I feel their essence. Their memories were very strong because of the experience we shared. I mean, when you break bread honestly with someone without expecting anything, where it's just out of friendship, it makes a big difference. And longevity in friendships and not as easy to get these days. When I started, there was an innocence there. But now, I look to see who's left. That's part of the reason why I'm thinking coming home, because the good ones are gone. And I have a few good friends still here, but all my other ones have left. And so that's kind of a wake up to life. You're suddenly in the front line and you're thinking, oh, I can see it coming now. A lot of people see it when their parents leave.
So you think for you it might be a case of going full circle and you're thinking now it might be time to kind of come home. Is that where your mind is at?
Yes, because I feel that one of the areas within me that is missing is the experiences I had and not had with my family. Because in the end, the celebration of success was to share with family. Because when you've come from a minimum in life where things were struggles in those days, it's nice to come full circle. There's a meaning behind it. I haven't found it yet. It only comes when you've completed it. But when I saw my family this time, I realized that part of me was sacrificed. And so that's why friendships and all that, let's face it, when we don't have love and we don't have those types of embraces, what does it mean? What does the success mean? It's great and whatever, but in the end, it's the heart that's still beating that wants to feel things. And I feel that I've missed out there. And so also some of my friends, that's why Steve Isley is really the only friend I have left in Australia.
Thaao, can I say it has been an unmitigated joy chatting to you. You really are, look, as they say in Australia, a sweetheart.
I've done a lot of interviews in my life, but I have to say, you lift the energies of the person you're interviewing, because the place you come from, the spirit that you come from, there's a big difference. Some people come in their own rote, they've got all the questions or whatever, but you have a love of things.
And for people who've been watching this interview thinking that's odd, it's gotten very dark at Thao's place, it's because we started the chat in the afternoon. I think you've gone through about 2 batteries, and now it's approaching midnight. You see, it goes to show between you and me, Thaao, we just can't shut up, can we?
Yes, but we are interesting people because we do interesting things. People say they're bored. No, they're boring.